The words were a coiled snake in my throat, venomous and ready. I had practiced them in the car, hissing them at my reflection in the rearview mirror until my face was a blotchy, unfamiliar mask. You can't just disappear. You can't just take 6 months of my life and burn it for fuel and then act like I never existed. The script was memorized, the righteous anger a hot shield against the hollow ache in my chest. I stood on the porch of Chloe's parents' house, the one she'd retreated to after her latest self-inflicted drama, and watched the sky turn the color of a fresh bruise. Rain was coming. I could smell it, a clean, sharp scent of ozone and wet earth that did nothing to wash away the sour taste of betrayal in my mouth. My knuckles were white where I gripped the useless, sentimental box of her things, a worn t-shirt that still smelled faintly of her perfume, a dog-eared copy of a book I'd given her, a roll of film from our trip to the coast we never got developed. Proof of life. Proof that I wasn't a ghost she could simply walk through. I raised my hand to knock, the motion feeling slow and heavy, like I was moving through water. The house was an imposing colonial, white pillars gleaming like bone in the fading light. It always felt less like a home and more like a statement of success, a place where emotions were probably polished away with the silver. I knocked. Harder than I intended. The sound echoed, swallowed by the sheer size of the door. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, the snake of my anger uncoiling, ready to strike. The lock clicked, a sound as precise and final as a guillotine. The door swung inward, and my entire practiced speech died on my lips, turning to ash. It wasn't Chloe. It was her mother. I had only met Helena twice. Once at a sterile gallery opening where she'd shaken my hand with cool, dry fingers and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The second time was at a tense holiday dinner where she'd moved through her own home with the silent, efficient grace of a predator, her presence a constant, low-level hum of authority that made Chloe shrink and fidget. She was older than I remembered, or maybe just more tired. The lines around her eyes were deeper, etched into her skin like fine cracks in porcelain. She wore a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe but elegant knot. She was tall, taller than Chloe, and held herself with a stillness that was both unnerving and captivating. She looked at me, her gaze taking in my rain-dampened hair, the pathetic box in my hands, the wild, cornered look in my eyes. She didn't seem surprised to see me. She didn't seem anything at all. Her expression was a placid lake, and I had no idea what monsters lurked in its depths. "Eliza," she said. My name from her lips wasn't a question or a greeting. It was a statement of fact. A simple acknowledgement of my existence that, for some reason, felt more validating than anything Chloe had said to me in weeks. My anger, that hot, protective shield, simply evaporated, leaving me exposed and shivering. The first drop of rain hit my cheek, cold and startling. Then another and another. The sky opened up. "She's not here," Helena said, her voice calm and even over the sudden drumming of the downpour on the roof of the porch. Of course she wasn't. Chloe was never where the fallout landed. She was the storm, and she left others to deal with the wreckage. I should have turned around. I should have left the box on the doorstep and walked back to my car, letting the rain wash away the last 6 months. But I was frozen, rooted to the spot by her unblinking gaze. Helena looked past me at the deluge, then back at my soaked jacket. She sighed, a small, quiet sound of resignation. "You'd better come in," she said, stepping back to hold the door wider. "You'll catch your death." The house was just as I remembered, cavernously large and impeccably clean. It smelled of lemon oil and old paper and something else, something faintly floral and sad, like flowers left too long in a vase. The air was still and cool, a stark contrast to the churning chaos outside. Helena closed the door behind me, the sound a heavy, definitive thud that cut off the roar of the storm. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was even louder. I stood dripping on an antique Persian rug, clutching the box to my chest like a life raft. I just came to drop this off," I stammered, my voice sounding small and foreign in the grand entryway. "Chloe left some things." Helena's eyes flickered to the cardboard box. There was no pity in her gaze, just a kind of weary assessment. "I see," she said. She didn't offer to take it from me. Let me get you a towel. She disappeared down a hallway, her footsteps silent on the dark wood floors. I was left alone with the ticking of a grandfather clock that sounded like a nervous heart. I took a deep, shaky breath, the polished air feeling thin in my lungs. This was all wrong. I was supposed to be yelling, crying, demanding answers. Instead, I was a guest. A wet, pathetic stray she'd taken in out of some sense of civic duty. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest and swallowed it down. Helena returned with a thick, cream-colored towel that felt sinfully soft. The kitchen is this way, she said, already turning. I'll make some coffee. Or tea, if you prefer. I followed her like a child, my wet sneakers squeaking on the pristine floor. The kitchen was a vast expanse of stainless steel and dark marble, a professional-grade space that looked like it had never seen a messy pot or a splash of sauce. But as Helena moved through it, the room seemed to warm, to shrink to a more human scale. She didn't turn on the harsh overhead lights, instead flicking on a small lamp over the sink that cast a soft, golden glow. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows, but in here, there was only the quiet, domestic sound of Helena grinding coffee beans. The rich, dark scent filled the air, a comforting aroma that cut through my anxiety. She worked with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. There were no wasted steps, no fumbled gestures. Every movement was precise, deliberate. Watching her hands, long-fingered, capable, with neatly filed, unpolished nails, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. She wasn't Chloe's mother in that moment. She was just a woman making coffee in a storm. Cream and sugar, she asked, her back to me. Just black, thanks, I managed, setting the soggy box down on the floor by my feet. It felt wrong to put it on her perfect counters. She nodded, pouring the steaming liquid into two simple, heavy ceramic mugs. She brought them to a small wooden table tucked into a breakfast nook that overlooked the garden, which was now just a thrashing mess of green and gray. She gestured for me to sit. We drank our coffee in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the storm, the clock in the hall, and the soft clink of Helena's mug against its saucer. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. The coffee was strong and dark, almost bitter, but it was good. It tasted real. I kept waiting for her to say something, to offer an excuse for her daughter, to tell me Chloe would call, to ask me to leave. She did none of those things. She just sat there, across the small table, and watched the rain lash against the glass. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't entirely uncomfortable either. It was weighty, full of all the things we weren't saying about the person who was the reason I was here. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. The quiet felt like an accusation. She didn't even call, I said, the words coming out cracked and raw. She just stopped. After everything, Helena turned her gaze from the window to me. Her eyes were a deep, stormy gray, the same color as the sky, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in them. Not pity. Empathy. No, she said softly. She wouldn't have. It was a confirmation, not an apology. A simple, brutal statement of fact. And in that moment, I felt a bizarre kinship with this elegant, reserved woman. We were two people who had been left in the wake of Chloe's particular brand of hurricane. We understood its destructive path. I don't understand how someone can do that, I whispered, looking down into my coffee cup as if the answers were swirling in the black liquid. How you can build a life with someone, and then just walk away like it was nothing. Helena took a slow sip of her coffee. Some people are architects, she said, her voice low and reflective. They love the blueprints, the excitement of the build. But they have no interest in living in the house once it's finished. They just want to move on to the next empty lot. The metaphor was so precise, so devastatingly accurate, that it stole the breath from my lungs. She understood. She had seen this before. She had probably lived in the wreckage of Chloe's abandoned projects her whole life. I looked up at her, really looked at her, and saw past the imposing facade. I saw the quiet resignation of a woman who loved a daughter she couldn't fix. The loneliness in this big, empty house felt profound. It was in the way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly when she thought I wasn't looking, in the way she held her mug with both hands, as if for warmth. I had come here to fight, to rage against the injustice of being discarded. But sitting across from Helena, my anger felt misplaced, juvenile. The real tragedy wasn't my broken heart. It was her lifetime of them. The storm intensified, the wind howling around the corners of the house like a grieving animal. The lights flickered once, twice, and then, with a final, apologetic buzz, they died. We were plunged into a deep, velvety darkness, broken only by the intermittent, silent flashes of lightning that lit the room in stark, ghostly monochrome. For a beat, neither of us moved. The sudden absence of electricity made the space feel smaller, more intimate. I could hear Helena's soft intake of breath in the dark. "Well," she said, her voice laced with a dry, almost amused bitterness. "That's fitting." She stood, and I heard the scrape of her chair on the wooden floor. "Stay there. I know where the candles are." I listened to her sure, quiet footsteps moving away, then the sound of a drawer opening and closing. She returned a moment later, the small, brave flame of a match illuminating her face, carving sharp shadows under her cheekbones. She looked ancient and timeless, like a figure from an old painting. She lit a thick pillar candle on the table between us, its warm light pushing back the oppressive darkness. The flame danced, casting our shadows, long and distorted, on the walls behind us. In the flickering, forgiving light, Helena seemed to shed a layer of her formidable armor. The severe lines of her face softened. She looked less like a matriarch and more like a woman who was just as lost in the dark as I was. She set another, smaller candle in a holder near me. As she pushed it across the table, her fingers brushed against mine. It was the briefest of contacts, skin against skin, but a jolt went through me, sharp and clean and utterly terrifying. It had nothing to do with the storm, nothing to do with fear. It was something else entirely, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird beating against a cage. I didn't dare look at her. I stared at the candle flame, watching the wax melt and pool, mesmerized by its slow, steady destruction. My reasons for being here, my anger at Chloe, all of it felt distant and fuzzy, like a half-remembered dream. The only reality was this small circle of light, the storm outside, and the charged silence between me and this woman whose touch had just rewired my entire nervous system. I had to break the spell. The silence was becoming a physical presence, pressing in on me, and the air was so thick with unspoken things I could barely breathe. I needed to fill it with noise, with the ugly, messy truth of why I was there. I needed to remind myself who she was, who I was. I loved her, I blurted out, the words tasting like blood and salt. I really, truly loved her. And I think the worst part is that I thought she loved me, too. The confession hung in the air, raw and exposed. I finally looked up at Helena. She was watching me, her gray eyes luminous in the candlelight. She wasn't judging me. She wasn't pitying me. She was simply witnessing me. Her stillness was a gift, an invitation to unload the burden I'd been carrying. So I did. The whole story came pouring out of me in a torrent, a messy, disjointed narrative of hope and betrayal. I told her about our first date, about the way Chloe had looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I told her about the apartment we'd almost rented, the future we had sketched out on cocktail napkins. I told her about the slow, creeping chill of the last few weeks, the unanswered texts, the flimsy excuses. I told her everything, the beautiful and the ugly, laying the wreckage of our relationship out on the table between us. When I finished, my voice was hoarse and tears I hadn't known were there were tracking cold paths down my cheeks. I felt empty, scoured out. I waited for her to say something, to defend her daughter, to tell me I was being dramatic. Instead, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on something over my shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. When Chloe was 7, she began. She found a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. She was so tender with it. She made a little bed for it in a shoebox, fed it with an eyedropper. She loved that bird with everything she had. She paused, her eyes finding mine in the dim light. And when it was strong enough to fly, when it had healed completely, she took it out into the garden and She crushed it in her fist. A wave of nausea rolled through me. She breaks things, Helena continued, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Especially the things she thinks are too beautiful, too good. She doesn't know how to hold on to them. She doesn't believe she deserves them. So she destroys them before they can leave her. It wasn't an excuse. It was a diagnosis. A confession of a pain so much deeper and older than my own. In that moment, Chloe ceased to be the villain of my story. She became a tragic, broken character in a much longer, sadder play. And her mother was the one who had to sit in the audience and watch the same final act over and over again. The weight of her words settled between us, heavier than any silence had been. The storm outside seemed to be holding its breath, the wind and rain momentarily ceasing their assault. All I could hear was the frantic beat of my own heart and the soft, almost imperceptible sound of Helena's breathing. She looked so achingly vulnerable in the candlelight, the carefully constructed walls of her composure crumbling into dust. The formidable matriarch was gone, replaced by a woman drowning in a quiet, lifelong grief. An involuntary tear escaped my eye and traced a hot path down my cheek. Before I could wipe it away, Helena reached across the table. Her movement was slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I stayed perfectly still as her fingers, impossibly gentle, brushed against my skin. Her touch was cool, a stark contrast to my heated cheek, but a fire spread from that point of contact, racing through my veins, warming me from the inside out. It wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a gesture of profound, shared understanding. A recognition of the cracks in my own facade. In her eyes, I saw my own loneliness reflected back at me. I saw the same desperate ache for a connection that wouldn't shatter in my hands. The world narrowed to the space between us. The house, the storm, Chloe, it all faded away, leaving only the flickering candle, the scent of rain and coffee, and the electric hum of her touch against my skin. The snake of anger in my gut was long gone, replaced by a longing so fierce and so unexpected it made me dizzy. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. It felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability, like two planets finally succumbing to a gravitational pull they'd been fighting for ages. I leaned forward into her touch, and her face drew closer to mine. Her eyes searched my face, asking a question I couldn't have put into words, but answered with every fiber of my being. Her lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not in the way I'd known it before. There was no fire, no desperate claiming. It was soft, hesitant, and breathtakingly tender. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of coffee and salt and a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. It was the quietest, most earth-shattering thing that had ever happened to me. It was the sound of two locked rooms, their doors finally swinging open. It was the feeling of breathing after holding my breath for a lifetime. We pulled apart slowly, the space between us still crackling with energy. The kiss lingered on my lips, a warm, tingling imprint. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for what had just happened, for the tectonic shift that had just occurred beneath our feet. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows, and the wind had died down to a whisper. As if on cue, the lights in the kitchen flickered back to life. The sudden, harsh glare of the overhead fluorescent was a brutal intrusion. We both flinched, blinking in the unexpected brightness. The intimate world of candlelight was shattered, and we were just two women sitting in a sterile, expensive kitchen, the wreckage of our lives scattered invisibly around us. I looked at Helena. In the bright light, the vulnerability was gone, her mask of cool composure sliding back into place, but it didn't fit quite right anymore. I could see the cracks. I could see the woman underneath. She looked away, her gaze falling to the sad, forgotten box of Chloe's things on the floor. I followed her eyes. It looked so foolish now, so insignificant. The monumental importance I had placed on it, on the confrontation, on the need for closure from Chloe, had vanished. That chapter was over. It had ended the moment Helena opened the door. What this new chapter was, I had no idea. It was terrifying and confusing and felt more real than anything I had ever known. I should go, I said, my voice husky. It felt like the wrong thing to say, but it was the only thing I could think of. Helena nodded, not meeting my eyes. The roads might still be flooded. I'll be careful. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I picked up the box. For a second, I considered leaving it, but that felt wrong too. It was my baggage, not hers. She had enough of her own. I walked to the door of the kitchen, then paused, turning back. Helena was still sitting at the table, staring at the candle, which was still burning, its small flame looking pale and insignificant in the electric light. "Helena," I said. She looked up, and our eyes met across the room. The air was thick with everything we couldn't say. "Thank you. I'm sorry. What is this? What are we?" "The coffee was good," I said instead. A small, sad smile touched her lips. It was the first real smile I had ever seen from her, and it transformed her face, making her look years younger. "I'll make another pot," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a promise. An invitation. It meant don't go. It meant stay. It meant this isn't over. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would be back. I had come here for a confrontation, seeking an ending. I was leaving with a beginning. I turned and walked out of her kitchen, leaving the box by the front door as I left, my heart a wild, hopeful, terrified drumbeat in the quiet house.